Water running down my face. Black tea. Grind is gone, I can't replace. Black tea. I can't continue in this place. Black tea. Oh, no, no, no.
As the COVID-19 pandemic begins to wane and society reopens, America is once again confronting a serious epidemic of gun violence in urban communities. Children and young adults are dying all across the country. Mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters are left grieving and unable to understand why this is happening. They are being left without answers and solutions to this ongoing crisis. The question remains for many, what do we do? How do you heal from such a devastating loss? And what will stop this ongoing crisis? Black Americans are disproportionately dying from this epidemic. According to USA Today, young black men and teens made up 1/3 of all homicide victims in 2019. Blacks experienced 10 times the gun assault injuries and nearly 3 times the fatal police shootings of white Americans, according to Everytown's Research and Policy Center. 26 black Americans are killed by guns every day. 104 experience non-fatal injuries, and every other day a black person is killed by police. What is clear is that tough on crime laws do not change the mind and hearts or behavior of young people. New gun legislation and locking up children for the rest of their lives is not the answer. But the question is, what is? We will discuss these questions and more on this SQTV special presentation of Gun Violence in America, a public safety emergency. I'm San Quentin News journalist Steve Brooks, and welcome to our program.
James Baldwin once said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." Today we come face to face with healing and trauma. Today we're talking to Montreal Blakely Sr. about how incarcerated people who lose their children and loved ones can get help through the process of dealing with their trauma and finding healing. Montreal, thank you for coming to our program.
How you doing?
So I want to read a little bit from your piece, Black Tears. Can you tell me, first and foremost, when did you write Black Tears?
I wrote Black Tears a couple months ago. The reason I wrote Black Tears, for years, I've been noticing how kids been getting killed in the communities, and I've been noticing how the mothers of all these cities, I'm born and raised in Chicago, and a lot of killings go on in Chicago. So Black Tears, not for a metaphor as black people, but literally black tears falling from our eyes.
After reading your piece, Black Tears, I wanted to ask you, could you please give me some more insight on how you learned about your son's death and how it hit you from the beginning?
A Saturday night, my son had just left the mall taking graduation pictures for a senior graduation in San Francisco, and he was in the hospital. After I picked up his mother, me and her rushed to the hospital. Once we got there, they stated he was in surgery. They escorted us upstairs, and me and my wife was on our way to talk to the doctor, so they say. And when we did meet the doctor, he actually came in and told us our son was gone. Because the way they came to us and said he was dead, instead of, I just felt that they could have came or brought it to us a better way.
Okay. So Over the years, what have you been able to do to help you process your trauma?
Over the years, personally, when you speak of how do you overcome, you never overcome. And as a black man, the way I was raised to handle whatever came my way. Whatever situation that came into my life, I had to deal with that situation. So there was no therapy, there was no, I can't handle this, there was no church, there is no special entity outside of myself. I had to learn how to deal with the pain. I had to learn how to deal with the guilt a father feels when he loses a kid. I didn't know how to deal with a situation where maybe the average person, especially the average person that's not a black man, not our culture, we deal with things ourselves. We don't go looking for somebody else to deal with things.
Reading your piece, in your story, you mentioned being in hell. Can you please explain to me what you meant in your story about being in hell?
Well, being in hell was probably, what I meant by that was probably the first couple years of my son's death. I didn't want to believe it. I was very aggressive, very violent at the time. I didn't believe in God anymore. It seemed at that time that life wasn't life. I was just going through a process, you know, and like I say, when you bury your own kid, when you're looking over a casket and seeing your kid lying there in that casket, to you there's no life. And that's what I meant by I'm living in hell.
You also said in your piece that it was like being in the middle of a fire and that you were burning up. You can't outrun it and you can't put it out, is what you said specifically. What do you mean by that?
What I meant by that, just say it's a house on fire and we're in that, and you're a fireman and you're in that house and you can feel the heat, you could smell it, and you can't get out. You know you can't get out that house. So you learn to accept whatever is coming. You learn to accept that pain. You can't run from it. All you can do is to get used to that pain. And that's why I mean you can't outrun a fire. If you're in one, you can't outrun it. All you can do is learn how to accept that pain and whatever else is getting ready to come with it.
Okay.
When a kid has been taken from you, you lose certain morals about yourself, certain things about yourself, because you've buried your kid or you lost your kid. And in my case, I've sinned. I'm not saying I sinned where I hurt and killed somebody, but I've sinned. I'm saying I'm not perfect. So for me to cuss God like I did, and you know, I'm still right now today trying to adjust and trying to get back, or trying to let God back into my life. But once something taken from you that you love so much, so young, and he had so much to offer to life, and here it is, somebody said, believe in God. God is this, God is that, you know. And it takes you where, how can I believe in something that's supposed to be so big, and he takes something so sweet? So I couldn't understand that at the time. And right now today, I still have problems understanding that. And I'm trying to move back toward believing in God and working with God, but it's still a process.
My baby boy is no longer here. Oh, all I have left are these dark tears, yeah.
Now I'm talking to Vincent O'Bannon, who recently lost his son to gun violence. Mr. O'Vannon, thank you for being on our program.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you found out that your son had died?
It was actually by a phone call. My wife told me that he was gone. I still don't believe it today. But yeah, that's how I found out.
And exactly what happened?
From talking to my son before he was killed, I knew he was going through some mental health issues. This particular day, he got into a fight or an argument with someone, and later on in the day, I don't know exactly what happened or how it happened, but he ended up in the car with someone that either had something to do with the fight earlier or was there earlier, and they got into it, and yeah, he ended up getting shot 5 times.
So I know it's difficult to deal with this because this is very recent events. And I don't know if anybody could really totally heal from this at all. But I would like to know, what have you been doing to deal with this issue?
Some days I just wallow in it. Other days I try and stay busy to keep my mind off of it. I haven't done much talking to anyone because I'm from that era or that where we don't speak about things like that. We don't seek out clinicians, mental health counseling or anything like that. So when it hits me, when I start remembering things about him, I'll give it its moment, and then I'll try and move away from it. I'll try and think of something else to keep me from going down that rabbit hole of despair, of depression, of guilt.
So you say that you rather deal with this on your own. You don't want to reach out to any type of mental health professionals or anything like that?
This happened in June 22nd of this year. And not long after that, I spoke with a clinician, a mental health clinician. But at the time, I did not want to speak on that subject. So we spoke around it because I was not ready to deal with that pain, that anger, that hurt, what it could potentially cause me if I started thinking about it. And since then, no, I have not reached out to them. As I say, I deal with it in spurts.
As you go day to day in your struggles, what do you find that may be helpful for you as you deal with this issue?
What I find helpful for me is writing, journaling. Without that, I would probably go crazy. Writing helps me relieve a lot of the mental stress that I go through. Being a part of San Quentin news staff, and having a lot of stuff to write about and write on, it keeps me dialed in.
So, if another black person, or any person for that matter, found themselves in the shoes that you're in today, what would you suggest that they do to deal with their pain?
Well, we all deal with pain differently. There's no one set standard or rules that, we go by in dealing with pain. We're all different individuals. So I may deal with my pain by compartmentalizing. Others may deal with their pain by acting out. If I had to offer any advice to anyone, I would say, know who you are. Understand the way you deal with pain and deal with it accordingly. Do not let it overwhelm you. Do not look at the situation in a negative light, because for me, I always say that there is a positive in every negative situation.
So with the rising levels of gun violence in our inner city communities, what do you think that could be the possible solution to stopping it?
Parents teaching their children not to play with guns. Parents need to really get on their children, be on their children, talk to their children, and let them know that life is precious. You know, and sometimes we don't realize that or don't think that until we're locked up in prison. So teach your children, is what I would say. You know, help them to understand the value of human life. We can't keep continuing to tear our own communities down, killing our brothers and sisters, people that we've grown up with, people we go to school with. You know, we can't keep doing that. And as long as parents aren't teaching their children at a young age, it's going to continue to happen.
Time for us to causing to cry all these tears. Why we're crying all these tears? For our sons and daughters, gunned down, life stolen. Please tell me the end is near. Someone tell me that it's near. Killing each other, hurting these mothers, robbing them of life, robbing them of their lives. Broken by burying their son. Oh, you know it ain't right. Yeah, it seems like all I do is cry.
All right, thank you. I'm here with Dr. Nigel Hatton, talking about gun violence and trauma and healing in America. And Dr. Hatton, first of all, thank you for coming to San Quentin, and thank you for allowing us to interview you about this issue. Can you please give us a little bit about your job, your background and experience?
Thank you for allowing me to be here. It's an honor and a privilege to be here among you. I learned from you all so much, and I really appreciate the kind of dialectical conversations that we have. I am an associate professor of literature and philosophy at the University of California, Merced in the Central Valley. And I'm also a part-time lecturer at Columbia University in New York City. I teach in their narrative medicine program. I have volunteered at San Quentin State Prison through the Prison University Project and also Mount Tamalpais College since 2003.
On this show, we had an opportunity to talk to a couple of people who have lost family members since they've been incarcerated to gun violence. And for people that are incarcerated, being able to process and get some type of healing from the trauma that's inflicted upon them as a result of the gun violence that took place and took their family members away from them, there's really no outlet for that. And so, since gun violence in America is an epidemic, as I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of gun violence in America and there's a lot of people dying right now. There seems to be no solution to that problem. We need to try to figure out a way where we can reach incarcerated people and say, hey, here's an outlet where you can go to heal.
Yes.
Because we want to be able to teach them that healing is important. And so the reason why I want to talk to you is because we don't really know about a lot of these outlets. We know it's important to heal. We know it's important to process trauma. But in your opinion, what are some of the ways in which people who lose a family member to gun violence can go about processing their trauma?
Thank you for that question. First, I want to say that I'm deeply saddened by the loss of the children of your colleagues and your friends, and that we continue to deal with this problem in the United States. The Centers for Disease Control, which puts out the statistics of the leading causes of death of human beings in the United States, has the charts that show that the leading cause of death for African American men and women up to the age of 30 is indeed homicide, and much of that coming from gun violence. So it's a big problem in our society. Those numbers aren't the same for white Americans. It becomes that number when you look at the charts for African American life. And because of this prevalence, it is also true that there are many people who are mourning the loss of their children. Both those that are prominent cases, such as Trayvon Martin's parents, right? The parents of Tamir Rice, the parents of Jordan Davis. So on the one hand, we have this tragedy, but it's also true that because of this tragedy, there are many people grieving and who have created support services, who've created grieving circles, who've created organizations. Take, for example, Trayvon Martin's mother, Sylvia Fulton, and the Trayvon Martin Foundation, and that they've created an entire foundation that is to create resources for human beings who have lost their children to homicide. that's very disturbing that we have to have that in our society, but it is also important to know that those resources exist. I would say to look at places like Trayvon Martin Foundation and the resource lists they provide that show nationally where you can go to get support. So that's one way that we can think about it. The other is place certainly for African Americans is faith-based organizations, right? And it does not mean that you have to be affiliated with that faith-based organization, but there are many faith-based organizations and churches and organizations of the like that are doing this kind of work and that are cognizant of the needs of the African American community, that have a familiarity with those statistics that I referenced from the Centers for Disease Control, that are familiar with the prevalence of gun violence and its impact on African American life. And so out of this, they have created facilities and resources within their faith-based organizations to address those needs. For example, in the Bay Area, there are a number of activists who, because when they lost their children to gun violence, there was nothing available for them, they created organizations to fill that need. So you have organizations such as the Relatives of Victims of Gun Violence, an organization that has weekly meetings in facilities, and so anyone can come, right? And part of what they wanted to do was to address the situation in a way that could speak to African American life. For example, if someone loses their child to homicide, perhaps they might be referred to a grief agency or counselor or a grief circle. And then they find themselves in a circle where it's a diverse group, and some people in the group have lost their pet or their turtle, and then here's someone who has come having lost their child. And now how's that going to look, right? And so if you don't have someone who is thinking about it in the context of the particular needs of African Americans, then they wouldn't be able to address it in the ways in which they provide those specific resources. Meaning, as you walk around any urban center and encounter African Americans, they will tell you of someone they know who has lost a child, or they may have lost a child themselves. It's that prevalent. And if it is that prevalent, then there has to be resources, there has to be a response. And I think what you all are suggesting and what we know to be true is that the response does not rise to the level of the problem. Sylvia Fulton and the mother of Jordan Davis McBath, they say is that they have received great attention nationally because of the stories or narratives surrounding the loss of their children. But what they do when they speak is that they point out that this focus on their children alone misses the fact that it is happening everywhere to people who are unknown, whose stories aren't making the news, that aren't being a part of the videos, that aren't being cast across the world in these, viral, social media campaigns. So there are those who don't have the voice, who don't have the loss of their child as something that is advertised. And to their credit, the mothers of Trayvon Martin and others, they always make it a point to say, it's not just me. It is someone else who is living in a community that you don't know. And it is someone who is living in your neighborhood. So that in addition to knowing about the loss of my child, in her case Trayvon Martin, you need to know about the loss of the children that are happening right in your neighborhood. And so I think that's quite remarkable that even when the focus or the camera is shining on them so that they can talk about their own loss and mourning, they say, I want you to think about those who are right around you and those who aren't receiving this attention. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And as you have pointed out, it's even on the grounds of this prison.
So 28 people died here back in the summer of 2020, and there was one correctional officer who died as well. And coming out of that, nobody really had an opportunity to process that situation or, really come to terms with what had happened. Can you speak to that issue? How important is it to process trauma?
talk about intergenerational trauma, right? And trauma that replicates and carries, and the body carries the trauma. So there's trauma in here from centuries ago, right? From violence that has occurred across centuries, and the idea of it being retained and not processed, as you say, is something that leads to and begets more and more violence, right? So that intergenerational nature of the trauma is all the more reason why it has to be addressed, because if not, then it leads to greater tragedy. And we have seen that. We have seen that bear out. And certainly the data and the research also points to that. And so part of it is, right, that you seek out forms of therapy or psychotherapy or means of being able to process those kinds of concerns or what has been put inside. But as we know, there's a great mistrust in the African American community of therapeutic services, and rightfully so. There's the issue of safety, there's the issue of trust, there's the issue of one's information being used for nefarious means, there's the issue of being fetishized or objectified. There are ways in which African American life is continuously being denigrated. And so if one is thinking about seeking therapy, but then faces a system or a legacy of therapeutic services that hasn't historically been good to African American life, right? Always wanting to institutionalize them or to think of them as severely mentally ill. But if this is its historical legacy, how do you gain the trust so that African Americans can see the positive possibilities of therapy in the present? And I think that is something that the world of therapy has worked on a great deal. There are many number of scholars, African American scholars, address this question head on. And I would say even on the grounds of San Quentin, there are those who have testified to what was their initial skepticism about the possibilities of therapy. But once they gave it a try, saw that it could have certain possibilities. And I think that kind of testimony, that reliance on research and data from scholars who are focused on the needs of African Americans gives us a way to start to think about what are the positive possibilities of therapeutic attention. And so I take the point of what is the tension or what is the kind of hesitance, but I do see that there are many who have pointed to what happens when there is a kind of positive environment, where there is trust, where there is safety, and where there is an approach to thinking about those factors, those historical legacies, the trauma, the exposure to violence that many have experienced. And when these are addressed head on, then how does this make it a better experience for going into something like therapy? So I think this is part of it. And as you point out, it's something that is vitally necessary. And it's at every sector within our society. African American students in universities having concerns with therapy, right? Thinking about the stigma of therapy, what it means if someone in my family finds out that I have gone to seek therapy. How will they label me? What it means for African American manhood. What does it mean when I am the one who has to be strong? I am the head of the household. I'm the one who is supposed to be there and provide all the solutions for everyone. If someone finds out that I have gone to seek therapy, what does that mean for how they think about my strength, right? So if there is an approach where these issues and questions are answered or addressed head on, put out on the table, then the possibilities of therapy can be multiple. But if we ignore them, right, and suggest that they do not exist, and just merely say, this is how therapy works, and now you go and just see what happens, then this leads us back to that mistrust and that stigma. And I think addressing that mistrust and that stigma and making therapy something that African Americans understand that can be helpful for them is extremely important.
Yeah, I think we've gotten to a point to where, like you said, it's a perpetuation of a cycle that continues because we don't get to the point where we process it where we get it. And so now what we see is 2.3 million people locked up across this country. And a lot of that has to do with unprocessed trauma and this belief that you just stuff it, you don't do anything about it.
Right.
And so now, when we talk about gun violence in America, we talk about trauma and healing, this is a discussion that we want to open up across the country to incarcerated people across the country because we believe that it's an intricate part of rehabilitation. And so in order to be able to increase that narrative across the country, experts like yourself and other experts we invite into this conversation because we don't have all the answers. And we can't approach the system, but we see that there's this move to get us to start to do these things, to start to process these traumas. And any suggestions or any ideas that you would have would really be helpful to the incarcerated population in that issue.
I want to say that you do have the answers. You were saying you don't have the answers. I think this is one of the fundamental challenges that we have when it comes to knowledge, right? So we are in a system, a Western system, and we have been understood since the time of Plato to think of knowledge in a particular kind of way. And those who have knowledge or produce knowledge or are seen as having the kind of rationale where their knowledge is valid has primarily been understood as Western and European. But I want you to understand yourself as one who produces knowledge. And in fact, if the answers or the solutions to ending cultures of homicide or dismantling incarceration practices, right, and hyper-incarceration, it's going to come from knowledge producers such as yourself. And what it means is those who understand themselves as the authorities or in positions of power, and therefore because of that position of power are as the purveyors of knowledge, are going to have to listen to you. It's going to have to come from you. And so part of the work of coming here, even though I'm in the position of the academy, is that I'm going to facilitate, right, that exchange. Because as you have pointed out, you see things, you know things, even prior to being in this place. You knew things, you saw things, you understood things. And what we're saying is that why didn't anyone prior to when you were in here respect your knowledge production? You knew this place was wrong. You knew that there were patterns and institutions and practices and systemic conditions that then led to unfair practices toward African Americans. Women and men, parents who have lost their children to homicide, they were protecting their children before the homicide took place, before the gun violence took place. Think about what your parents told you and what my parents told me in terms of the rules they told us that were very strange sounding, right? Like, you can't do this, you can't do that. Those were acts of protection. They were trying to prevent the homicides. And that was knowledge. What I'm saying is that knowledge, because it is contrary to the approach that is the Western tradition, is being relegated to the margins. And what we want is for it to be in the center. African American culture has all of the answers to solve the problems that are before it. You mentioned the great W. Du Bois. Have you read his works? All of the answers are there. Brilliant man. And they won't even acknowledge him as the founder of sociology, right? And so if you don't respect the knowledge of African Americans and other cultural groups who have the answers to their very own problems, then we are merely just going around in a circle. So I would say that you can listen to a Frankie Beverly song, you can listen to some of these great hip-hop artists, you can read Du Bois, right? You can listen to our grandmothers, you can listen to our grandfathers, you can read the slave narratives of our ancestors. Everywhere are the answers to the problems that you are talking about. And what we have to do is to get these who are in power to respect that knowledge. So I'll just say, you say you don't have the solutions or the answers. I would challenge you on that and say you do.
Inside my chest, be a warm beating heart, but now it's broken, it's torn all apart. See, all night long I wake up and I scream, somebody please, somebody just wake me from this horrid dream. Water running down my face, black tea. My eyes is gone, I can't replace. Black tea. I can't continue in this space. Black tea. Oh, no. Oh. See, water running down my face. Black tea. My eyes is gone, I can't replace. Black tea. I can't continue in this place. Black tea. Oh, no, no. My baby boy is no longer here. Oh, all I have left are these dark, dark tears. Yeah. The trauma and the torture, it's demonic and it's so cruel. You better hold on to your children before it comes after you. Oh. Water running down my face. Black tea. My eyes is gone, I can't replace. Black tea. I can't continue in this space. Black tea. Oh, no. Oh. See, water running down my face. Black tea. Black tea. I can't continue in this place. Black tea. Oh, no, no, no. It's now time for us to stop causing to cry all these tears. Why we're crying all these tears? For our sons and daughters gunned down, life stolen. Please tell me the end is near. Tell me we can't keep killing each other, hurting these mothers, robbing them of life, fathers broken by burying their son. Oh, you know it ain't right. It seems like all I do is cry. Black tea. It's hurting way down deep inside. Black tea. Tell me how I ought to feel. Black tea. This all seems so surreal.
Heartfelt condolences expressed and felt. A piece of your heart took his last breath. Those responsible are some real jerks. Helpless anger makes us all berserk. Thomas O'Bannon, Vince's twin, still lives with him through memories within. V told me before writing my verse began, I hold Bub in my heart from his beginning to my end. Strong spirit in mind got cut too short, gone too soon, refine and find a new word. Pain and suffering and sorrow is what it is whenever parents have to bury their kids. No matter how rough the days get, no one really dies unless we forget the way that touched our lives and minds. I'm sorry for your loss, healing takes time.